J.P. Jarvi dreamed of living the glamorous life of a playboy, but addiction and poor judgment unraveled that vision, steering him down a darker path. Instead of reaching the stars, he was found dead in a gutter because he befriended someone who wasn't what he appeared to be.
Finally, I think, become the person that she has always wanted to be. Skylar is now legally a woman.
Before his brutal death at the hands of someone he trusted, J.P. Jarvi's beginning was promising before he fell into a downward spiral like a wounded bird. His full name was John Peter Jarvi. He was born on December 26, 1958, and grew up in a quiet Anaheim, California suburb. J.P. was a smart and quick-witted kid, but he was easily bored. His mother Betty once said his IQ was high, but he didn't do well in school because he was always goofing around. JP's tragic trajectory was set when a group of boys next door introduced him to drugs and would set the stage for his downfall later in life. Being bright, he graduated early from high school in 1977 and was propelled into adulthood. With a sharp mind for repairs and a natural charm that made him impossible for women to ignore, he launched a dental equipment repair business, unaware that the choices he made would lead him into a future far darker than he could ever imagine. JP pursued flying lessons and acquired a twin-engine Cessna. He envisioned a future shuttling well-connected business travelers that could help him with social climb. However, the monotony of pilot school and chronic back pain dampened his enthusiasm and led him away from the skies and toward a future addiction to painkillers. Lured by wealth, JP relocated to Newport Beach to gain closer proximity to privilege and luxury. His brother Jeff reflected that his sibling liked running with a rich crowd, and that's what got him into trouble. JP worked alongside the Indianapolis 500 and announced air shows. He was frequently captured in photographs with pilots who would later perish in tragic accidents, a haunting prelude to his own fate. However, JP's life wasn't all glamour. A motocross accident when he was 16 left him with chronic back pain, and it would be worsened by broken bones discovered years later. After multiple surgeries, he turned to opioids, which added to his growing drug struggles. JP drifted through his family's jewelry business, collecting a paycheck, but contributing little as his addiction took hold. Though gifted at fixing things, he never applied that skill to business or to himself. To his brother, he was simply a deadbeat. But what JP lacked in ambition, he made up for in romance, because he was charismatic and handsome. His mother recalled her son got around. Many of his relationships lasted only a few months until his late 30s. That's when he met a woman named Tina. Soon they got engaged. Heroin is remarkably difficult to kick, but he managed to stay clean for most of their 2-year relationship, partially due to how much he valued her. Nevertheless, his losing battle with addiction unraveled their engagement. Despite charitably accepting his history with heroin and having already purchased her wedding dress, Tina reached her limit after JP's cocaine relapse. She was unwilling to stay as he spiraled and became aware of his shady ways of making fast money. Life without Tina left the typically charming JP depressed. Desperate to change that, around 2000, JP hastily married Melanie, a recent divorcee who was 10 years his senior and who had her own demons. He had to have doubts about the hasty marriage because he didn't introduce her to his parents until after the wedding. The union quickly unraveled, and Betty believed it was annulled within a year because of Melanie's erratic behavior. Despite his freshly failed marriage, JP's judgment remained dangerously flawed. Soon he became entangled with a woman rumored to have served time as an accessory to murder. Despite his mother's and her husband's financial support with nothing asked in return, he fell under the sway of the dubious woman he had just met, who convinced him to repay their kindness by selling his mother's jewelry. It was a haunting prelude to the tragedy that would unfold from his fatal inability to discern friend from foe.
There!
I'm in danger!
Not only had she forgave him for stealing from her, his mother arrived at his condo that December for lunch, only to find Secret Service agents seizing his computer. Her son was being arrested for counterfeiting money. He got picked up in LA, made bail in February 2003, but it didn't last. They hauled him back in fast. By June, he was on the prison phone, voice low and steady. "Sell my condo," he told his mother. "I'm going to be in here at least 10 years. Again, being as much of a dutiful mother as anyone could dream of, Betty began renovating her son's condo for sale after his arrest, believing it was best to sell or rent their co-owned property. But that July, he was sentenced to just 8 months, followed by 4 years of supervised probation, transferred to Seal Beach Jail in August. When JP was released in October, he was eager to act on an investment tip that could at last secure his life on Easy Street. But there were bad omens ahead. He was shaken when his stepfather, who had supported him financially and otherwise, passed away. Upon returning from his father's devastating funeral, JP was dealt another blow that foreshadowed his poor judgment of character. He found his condo had been ransacked by the woman he was dating and her friends. Not only was JP grieving the loss of his father, he also had to cope with the salary his deceased father was no longer paying him. Adding to his turmoil was girlfriend, who wouldn't be the last person to betray him. She stole his work tools. He was never more desperate for income. To act on a tip for an oil deal, JP needed a $50,000 loan against the condo he co-owned with his mother. The only thing he needed was his mother's co-signature to secure his financial future. However, JP's mother had no inkling that her son had placed his financial trust in a penniless and dangerous sociopath, nor did she foresee that she had just unwittingly signed his death warrant. His mother presumed because JP had long moved in proximity to wealth, although it meant flaunting the illusion of affluence with fake designer watches and delivering Rolls Royces instead of owning them, that her son was receiving sound financial advice. Whereas his mother was oblivious, JP was naive. Poor JP foolishly thought his ship had finally come in, helmed by his new friend he met in prison, who could finally make all his lavish dreams of the good life real and not a cheap counterfeit. Sadly, JP had befriended a sociopath.
They have the money.
Calling Skylar Deleon a sociopath is probably an insult to sociopaths.
Few recognized the elaborate facade Skylar Deleon had constructed. He boasted of his wealth and fame, which was an irresistible trap for JP, who coveted the good life. It was a brilliant disguise that hid a sadistic danger. In reality, Skylar exaggerated his wealth. He was drowning in debt to the point he had been reduced to living in his in-laws' garage. Yet financial disarray was only a fragment of his deception. Beneath the surface lurked a delusional and dangerous mind of a parasite. He would eventually rob and end the lives of 3 people, including Jackie and Thomas Hawks, who would be covered in a future video.
To close friends, Skylar presented his delusions by falsely claiming to be a hermaphrodite, but only his wife, Jennifer, knew his strange secret. Her husband was determined to become a woman. Neither JP nor his mother suspected their involuntary roles in the bizarre and macabre drama ahead. Betty didn't recall her son mentioning Skylar by name, but she vaguely remembered him referencing the movie star. However, Skylar Deleon had peaked as a child actor in a minor role on the TV show Power Rangers. It never occurred to his mother that her son was taking financial advice from someone he met in prison. After JP's estranged brother Jeff offered an obligatory greeting, their mother handed JP a generous $500 gift. As he climbed into his van, she leaned in and told him to take care of himself. She was unaware it would be her final farewell to her struggling son. Nor did JP suspect that his end was near. He recently placed 3 calls to a rehab hotline because he was optimistic about finally getting clean for his best days ahead. Just as oblivious of the dark days ahead was Skylar's cousin Michael Lewis, who was Christian and had planned to spend the Christmas holiday with him, not realizing he was being entangled into a murder. As children, the cousins were inseparable, bonded by their shared love of surfing. And Michael was fascinated with Skylar's wild streak. As adulthood neared, Michael was drawn to the light of his faith while Skylar surrendered to his darkness. It's unclear if the reason why Michael didn't distance himself was because of his Christianity or that he knew that Skylar's father sexually abused his cousin as a child. During this fateful holiday, instead of reminiscing about their halcyon days of youthful indiscretion and scuba diving as discussed, Michael was only mildly surprised by Skylar's typical bait and switch. Instead of doing something fun, Skylar asked for help with an errand. It was a favor Michael would regret for the rest of his life. After breakfast, they stopped at a boatyard to wait for JP, who soon arrived in a red van. Skylar handed Michael $120 and his cell phone to save on roaming charges. He climbed into Skylar's expedition, and they set off. They briefly stopped for food and AM/PM near Doheny State Beach. Later, they refueled at the border in San Isidro before crossing into Tijuana. As they passed Rosarito Beach, Skylar's calls began. At first, the calls were lighthearted and idle, but soon shifting to something more deliberate. Skylar's tone hardened as he spoke of leaving JP with friends in Mexico for a few days. Moments later, he called again, casually revising the plan. Now, the friends would pick JP up instead. Each time, the details twisted ever so slightly. Michael felt a prickle of unease. Something in the air was wrong. They paused at a surf spot to check the waves, but instead of grabbing their boards, Skylar announced he needed to make a bank deposit. Michael and Skylar drove into downtown Ensenada and parked near Banamex. Skylar disappeared inside for about 15 minutes, while Michael and JP lingered in their vehicles. Eventually, JP wandered over and struck up a conversation with Michael. JP mentioned, despite his back surgery, he was still excited about Skylar teaching him to surf and looking forward to staying at his house. Michael was flabbergasted. He hadn't known Skylar owned property in Mexico. JP also spoke of their plans to hit up some bars while there and offered to cover the cost of a hooker for Skylar and himself, no doubt courtesy of his mother's birthday money that she gave him earlier that day. Aside from this perfect stranger offending his Christian sensibilities with a whore for Christmas, Michael grew suspicious. He knew that Skylar and his wife Jennifer were in dire financial straits to the extent that they couldn't afford a proper home and had been living in her parents' garage. When Skylar returned, he and JP got back into the expedition. Then, leaving the motor running, he came back over to tell Michael that JP had been in jail with him for money laundering and that he was the reason Skylar had gotten busted in the first place. And now, Skylar said disdainfully, JP was talking about getting them underage prostitutes. Skylar coolly said, "Follow me and watch my back." Not knowing what to think, Michael followed his cousin to north and inland along the coastal toll road for about 15 minutes before doubling back at a fork in the road. Along the way, Skylar called again. Despite the increasingly strange turn an ordinary day had taken, Michael's attention shifted from red flags to his growling stomach. He repeatedly asked Skylar when they could stop for food. In a little bit, Skylar kept replying. When Michael pressed about the house and their destination, Skylar dismissed his concerns. He said, "Don't worry about it. Just follow me. Not that much farther." They reached a military checkpoint where the guards waved Skylar through, leaving Michael momentarily stalled behind another vehicle. When he caught up, he found Skylar parked on a soft dirt road, deep in a desolate and hilly landscape. Michael swung his truck around and eased to a stop on the far side. He cast a glance over his shoulder. He watched as his cousin guided JP from the passenger seat. The door was left ajar as he steered him away from the roadside. One hand was rested gently on JP's head, the other steady on his back. A t-shirt or sweatshirt veiled JP's face, blinding him to his surroundings and to what was about to happen. As Michael watched them head down a gully, he could see a black object poking 4 to 6 inches out of Skylar's back pocket, which he later realized must have been a knife handle. He figured Skylar had seen him sitting in the truck, and yet Skylar didn't try to communicate with him. Was this a drug deal? Michael saw no other cars nearby, but something about the setup gnawed at him. Later, Michael reflected, "I didn't know what Skylar was going to do. Rob the guy, dump him, rough him up? I didn't know, and I didn't want to find out." A sense of dread settled fast and heavy. Michael knew he had to leave immediately. Imagine being so trusting to allow yourself to be blindfolded and led to a deserted area in a foreign country after giving someone you barely knew from prisoner life savings. What was JP thinking? Skylar left JP alone to die slowly after he slaughtered him. He managed to stagger a short distance where he was found dead near a busy highway. Michael had just cleared the checkpoint when his phone rang. It was Skylar.
A glance in the rear-view mirror confirmed it. His cousin was tailing him.
Skylar asked, "What's going on? Why'd you leave?" Michael replied in a tight voice, "I don't know what you're doing." Skylar didn't argue or explain what happened to JP. Then, ominously, he hung up. Scared and confused, Michael wanted nothing more than distance between him and his cousin. Instead of that, Skylar sped alongside his car and peered into his cabin. It chilled his blood. Then, heightening the tension, he brazenly made a gesture with his hand that mimed a next snap.
But this wasn't the first time he had seen Skylar act out the violent gesture. After watching the movie The Long Kiss Goodnight, sometimes out of nowhere, Skylar would muse about how simple it was to kill a man that way. Michael used to brush it off. Now he wasn't so sure. At the San Miguel rendezvous, Michael noticed Skylar had swapped his long-sleeve surf shirt for a short one.
Michael had a hunch where the first shirt had gone, and with whom. He didn't know what had just unfolded, and he didn't want to. Mercifully, Skylar drove ahead, unbothered. He darted through the border lanes like he owned them. Michael didn't catch up until northern San Diego County, where they paused at a TGI Fridays in Carlsbad, but they found a crowd not to their liking. They rerouted to a California pizza kitchen in Long Beach, where Michael thought he could finally rest, satisfy his long-neglected hunger, and possibly restore normalcy. He was mistaken. Seated and waiting for their food, Skylar said something that would haunt Michael forever.
"Welcome to our side," Skylar said, smirking and giggling. "You're working for the devil now." The comment not only mocked Michael's faith, but also insinuated his cousin was remorseless and had involved him in murder.
JP's brother Jeff refused to accompany their mother to identify JP's remains because he thought it was a trap. Instead, Jeff's father-in-law, Lou Molina, a retired police lieutenant, agreed to go with Betty. They left Anaheim at 9 a.m. and arrived at the mortuary 3 hours later. The sight waiting for them was ghastly. They had frozen JP. His lips turned black, Betty recalled. Although his neck was wrapped in a bandage, she could still see the knife wound. The autopsy showed that he'd been skillfully cut from front to back, left to right, and slightly downward. It was the signature of a trained, right-handed killer. Betty cremated her son, but she at least had the comfort that his killer was brought to justice. Skylar Deleon wasn't just charged with JP's murder. He was sentenced to death in April 2009 for the inhumane murders of Thomas and Jackie Hawks in 2004 and John Peter Jarvi in 2003. Skylar Deleon remains incarcerated at San Quentin State Prison on death row. However, due to California's moratorium on executions, Deleon is likely to remain imprisoned without execution unless the moratorium is lifted. After several botched attempts to crudely cut off his manhood, he was closely monitored for self-harm. Eventually, Skylar's self-selected gender-neutral name came in handy because he received medical assistance to finally become the transsexual he always wanted to be, courtesy of taxpayers.
Wow, well done.
He's a triple murderer, but he got somebody. What's your problem?
Please subscribe to help my new channel grow.